Perfect.
There it is. Never say sell. People can grab that at a bunch of different vendors and booksellers. Amazon, probably the easiest of them all, but they can also dig into a little bit on the website, which is a good website and one they can jump in on and look at your bios and a couple of short video clips about both of you respectively, talking through a few key ideas. So
Thanks
we'll
for
direct
saying that.
folks there at the end again.
Yep.
Well, let's do this. One of the things I'd really like to ask the two of you about is on a personal basis. Tom, you and I both today are in Bozeman, population 118,000 souls. Jacob, you're dialing in from Spokane, 230,000 souls. Isn't that a mistake, guys? Shouldn't you be based in London and Tokyo, or in Singapore and Boston, or some kind of place like this? You work with these big, serious consulting firms. How did it come to be that you're running a practice like yours from cities like these?
I'm going to tip this to Jacob. Jacob has worked at this company for 20 years and was present at the creation. I joined about a dozen years, so I'm going to have him tell our creation story.
Happy to, Tom. Yeah, so interestingly, our founder spun out of Arthur Andersen in 2001, like literally 6 months, I think, prior to the Enron debacle. And he had a cabin out in Montana. And I think one of the main sort of ideas he wanted to explore with this company is what could be done virtually. And now this is in an era that was pre-meeting requests. I mean, I didn't have a computer for 2 weeks when I started at this firm, if that reminds you of what the technology landscape was like back then. But I think we were exploring one sort of thesis, which continues to be important to our company today, which is, can we build a company where our jobs are in service of our lives and not the other way around? And I think a big part of that is living in the kinds of locations we live in and building a world-class business there. We've also found that, particularly, over the last 10 years or so, that the availability of talent, people want to live in Bozeman, Montana, but they don't necessarily want to move to Bozeman, Montana if it means not having a professional career. And I think we've been able to find a nice intersection between high talent individuals and people who want to live in a place like Bozeman, Montana.
And I would just add, there's a little bit of a labor arbitrage, which is the amount of money for people to live a good life in the rural West is slightly less than what it would cost to live in Tokyo or Sydney or San Francisco. And the difference in our company's cost structure is value that we can pass on to our clients. We're domestic outsourcing on some level.
Mm-hmm. In the leaves of the book, you do talk about travel and the significance, the value of, breaking bread together, seeing people in the flesh. You can sort of see, below the chest line as we see now. So how does that work? And normally if somebody had written a book, this isn't that germane a topic, but it's so topical given the substance of the book as well. So tell me about travel, Jacob.
Yeah, so I think that doing things virtually and efficiently is always beneficial, but there is no substitute for meeting people in person. Kevin and Tom are in person together right now, and I'm not with them, and I feel slightly outside of the conversation. And so I just think that there is no substitute for getting together in person. And in fact, in a lot of the consulting assignments we've done recently with major professional service organizations, there is sort of a gap in people's ability to engage in person because of what we all went through with COVID. So many firms have 2- and 3-year partners who have never stayed in a city for an extra night to take a prospect to dinner, to sort of engage with people one-on-one. It's a skill set that has sort of atrophied over the past number of years, and I think it's important that everybody build it back up as we move forward.
Kevin, I want to jump in and say, I think that it's easy to say, particularly if you're in the world of expert services. So you're smart at investment banking, or you're smart at intellectual property law, or you're smart at tax structures in Malaysia, that it's tempting to say the way in which we sell is through relationships and reputation and referral, and that's best done when we break bread together over dinner. And it's true, but it's not a universal good. And let me explain why. Consultants always want to jump to that step, but they often haven't earned the right to take somebody out for dinner, much less make them travel. So we work for large professional services firms, and they'll have marketing staffs, and they'll say, let's throw a swell gathering of potential customers in London. We'll have them all fly over, and then maybe they'll meet King Charles, and I don't know, they'll do a duet with Elton John. It's going to be a fantastic event that we're going to put on. And only 3 of their clients show up and none of the prospects show up. And that's because the prospects say, well, look, we're already working with an incumbent. I don't know you. I'm not sure I want to leave my family and go overnight to London and spend a week and be pulled out of the workforce. We have to all climb a relationship ladder with the people we most want to help that we don't now know. And oftentimes that starts with an initial Zoom call for 30 minutes, and maybe it rolls to an hour. And then maybe you've earned the right to say, I'm going to be in Atlanta. I'd love to stop by and put a face to a name. Maybe that's an hour and 15 minutes. And then maybe next time it's like, we should all grab dinner at this conference that we're going to. We're climbing a relationship ladder where the hallmark of that ladder is deeper and deeper engagement. But I would just counsel people listening not to sort of jump right to the final step, because oftentimes that'll be met with rejection.
Mm-hmm. If people get that sense of proportion wrong, Tom, so let's say they jump to the later step. They haven't earned the right for intimate dinner. Or there's maybe another one, which is they have earned the right for intimate dinner and they never ask for it. They continue to send text messages. Which do you think both of those are equally common, or that one is more common than the other in the world of professional services?
I think they're equally common. I think you're asking, do people let relationships that they've started, peter out? And I think the answer is yeah, all the time. The urgent takes the place of the important, and people are like, yeah, I haven't talked to that person in 2 years, and there's no reason I haven't, except that they weren't ready to buy right now, and I haven't taken the time to ask whether or not they might need my help today, 2 years later, as we're rolling out of COVID. That, I think, happens in equal measure to people saying, let's all go to some event that requires you to be away from your family for a week. Or the right. Other, I think, sin that I see a lot of is, how about I invite you to a webinar and you listen to me talk for an hour. I'm not going to ask you any questions. I'm not going to find out what your particular situation is. I'm not going to try and tailor what I say to you. And I'm going to presume that I am the font of all knowledge and that you have no experience at all. Experts like to do that, and it's not very effective.
A Kool-Aid blind tasting?
That's right.
Exactly.
I think what Tom says is important. And I think in our research, we find that professional service organizations underestimate the amount of trust they have with their clients. And because of that, they don't end up leveraging that trust for additional opportunities, for additional work. It's why I'm such a huge fan of well-designed and well-run client feedback programs, because you learn what you're doing wrong, you learn what you're doing right, and you sort of continue to grow the relationship in an honest way. And many firms don't do that well because they're just terrified of asking the questions to their best clients. And I don't think they need to be.
It's so true. Like, we've started at our company meetings inviting clients to open the company meeting with 10 minutes of just sort of saying hi, explaining their circumstance, explaining what we do for them, and giving us feedback. And at first, our client deliverers were like, well, I'm not sure that they've got the time to do that. It'll be an imposition. But it's funny, when we impose on each other in minor ways, we ask favors of each other, we build trust, we build connection. There's a direct correlation there. And like Jacob's saying, if we form client advisory boards, CABs, I think they're sort of known in the world of expert services as, where we convene, oftentimes virtually, our best clients, and we ask for their feedback, and we ask them to co-create the next generation of service offerings, and we ask them for feedback on how we're doing. That sometimes can feel like an imposition. How could I possibly ask the CEO of this client to show up for an hour and a half once a quarter and give me feedback? But it draws them closer as we're more human with each other, and we're like, hey, we're kind of making this up as we go along, just like you. We're smart, you're smart, we're smart at different things. How can we help you better? That is actually a welcome invitation by clients.
Quite a gesture of vulnerability, I think,
It
too.
is.
And
Yeah.
if done right, you command some respect for it. Because of the risk inherent in it, right? Like, what if the feedback is we pay you guys too much and you don't do
Exactly.
enough for us?
Right.
But at the least, then you know that before it's going to come as a punch out of left field.
Right. Be wholly irresponsible to say, I don't want to hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. On this note, there's something really unique about what was going on, I guess, in the lead up to this book. It wouldn't be uncommon for a lot of the authors that we speak to and interview to have done some rounds and had some consultations with professionals who have something to share, have a voice of authority. But it's considerably uncommon for somebody to have done the rounds with 100 conversations. Now, people won't realize why you guys are so uniquely placed, but Jacob, you had 100 conversations, not 15 and not 20, but 100. So maybe you can just say how it is you can get to that many, because I think it's a little bit of unique privilege of your work, but also what that did in terms of informing what you wrote.
Yeah, and Tom, chip in on this one, but I mean, I think you're right that because of the nature of our business in serving expert service firms, large and small, we just have relationships that we can go out and, by the way, just like Tom was saying, and ask for a favor, which is, would you mind giving me some time, and would you let me quote you in this book I'm about to write? But I think that the direction of the book changed many times as we went through that interview process, because what they're talking about is, of course, the white hot center of the problems that expert service firms face. And so it's a critical role. We're working on another book that will come out probably in 15 months or so. And we're doing the exact same thing, only we're even slow playing it more to have more interviews with more experts. Because we just find it so informative, and I think our goal is to let those interviews drive the writing.
Look, I'm going to get all recursive and sort of look past the curtain a little bit to what's going on beforehand. So, a tried and true method of an expert that wants to serve a select cohort of executives. So let's say you're an intellectual property attorney in Singapore, and you want to work with firms in a 5-country area that manufacture products and have intellectual property that they'd like to protect. And there is the general counsel of those companies, -1, in charge of protecting their intellectual property. So maybe there are 50 of those companies in this 5-country area. Underwriting the conversation between those people, that's sort of our bread and butter. That's what we do on behalf of practice leads. Convening those executives together signals to those 50 that you care more about intellectual property in Southeast Asia in manufacturing companies than anybody in the whole world does. And so I say, just to get a little recursive on us here, Kevin, I feel like you're building your business by interviewing authors on this podcast and signaling to the folks that listen that you are smart and that you're abidingly interested in these issues that they care about. And that's a way of demonstrating your interest in your expertise. We're doing the same thing with these books, right? We're interested in working with professional services practice leads that want to talk to current clients or potential clients, and we do that by convening peer groups. So how do we drive business development for ourselves? Well, one of the things that we do is we interview people that we'd like to work with in an effort to write a book. So that I don't think that is manipulative. What we're really doing is engaging with the people we most want to help around the subject that we want to help them on, in the context of a book, in the context of a peer group, in the context of a Zoom call. We are signaling to the people we most want to help, and where we have expertise and can help, that we are fellow travelers. And the questions that keep them up at night keep us up at night as well.
When you see, it's something common in a lot of the writing for, say, SaaS sales or other enterprise level sales, they'll talk about this thing called a discovery call, which is interesting because I think it might be borrowed from legal language where they also do discovery. But unfortunately, those have been kind of like boiled down to these short Q&A style scripts, which are somewhat artificial. But when you think about the let's say the spirit of what discovery really ought to be, what a way to question people. I'm working on a book. I am trying to wrestle with a thorny problem myself, and your voice would be quite interesting and important in that wrestling match. That's discovery. Right, that really is the spirit of discovery, in that people have to open up in a different way than, hey, do you mind if I ask you about your decision-making authority at your organization? Yeah,
it goes to like, I think some people in expert services feel like it's one to many. I'm smart at intellectual property, and I'm going to teach you how to do this because you're dumb at intellectual property. I never think about it that way. I think about it this way. You have been working for your company, the manufacturing company in Daegu, for 20 years. You know more about your industry and the intellectual property associated with your manufacturing facilities than I will ever. But I have a different sort of experience set, which is I've been working with manufacturing firms all across South Asia for the last 20 years. So while my experience is not super deep in one company, it's quite broad. And I'm a bee cross-pollinating best practices. And together with your expertise, your deep domain expertise in your industry and your company, and me with my broad perspective, together, we can craft something that is bigger than the both of us.
I completely agree, Tom. And I think one of the mistakes I've seen consultants make is falling in love with the materials. We have a 5-step process for innovation. Every company out there feels like they're a unicorn. They've got 27 instances of an ERP. They've got, a different work from home strategy. All these different things make every single company a unicorn. And it is a big mistake to show up with the solution before you've listened and understood the problem.
How many times have we talked to companies over the years and had them go, see, you need to understand.
Yep.
We're a little different than other folks.
That's right.
I mean, it's true. We are. All companies are different. There's a truth to it. That's their expertise, is their difference.
And if you're just looking for what I think is a useful model, like the 5 whys model that I think actually comes out of manufacturing. Now, we're not so pedantic that we just ask why 5 times, but it's a proper framework for thinking about drilling down into a problem and truly understanding what your organization is going through, so you can craft a solution that isn't just on sort of surface understanding of what's happening.
Mm-hmm. I hope we can circle back a little bit to questioning, because one of the themes that we have pursued in some of our other authors is that there are questioning professions that we know of, right? There's investigative journalism. There is cross-examination in law. There are people who do interrogative work, right? Or there's people who question under duress, like torture and so forth. And you guys are questioners. That's, you know, a very key piece of your work. And it shows up in this book. This book is not instructions on how to do your job, but it's instructions on how to do this important work of business development. I want to get around to questioning, but maybe if you guys will indulge me, I want to make sure that people capture to me what is the absolute core of this book. And here's the lens through which I see it. There's a really impoverished language, particularly for business development in professional services. The language gets borrowed and repurposed from other places, and you end up with these really inappropriate terms like upselling. Well, what does it mean for let's say, what would be an intellectual property attorney? You just used this example, Tom. What is the upsell on an intellectual property attorney? As soon as you say that, everybody's getting creepy feelings, right? The prospective clients, the actual client, the attorney themselves, and yet there, to date, hasn't been a decent taxonomy or a decent language to map this. And so, you know, without just being too much of a fanboy here, I really want to cheerlead the fact that you guys have brought to the table some fresh language. More,
yeah, it really doesn't work when you're an intellectual property attorney and you deliver some good work, and then you go to the client and say, would you like to supersize that? It's not what we're all going for here.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's the antithesis of what you call the professional or the expert's Hippocratic oath, which is, you know, help first. This is just sort of like, well, whatever I gave you must have been commoditized because I've got a fries with that version. But here's 6 new words, and I think this is where we need to spend some time, guys. More, expand, extend, reach, evolve, innovate. Now, these are a counter offer to, I think, what are the standing 2 terms, which I unapologetically called impoverished, which is cross-sell and upsell. So can I just like throw that out there and ask you to take us into what your new words are about?
So I think I'm going to start with the bottom 3. We call it a diamond of opportunity, and it's a hexagram with 6 different nodes on it. And the 3 at the bottom are kind of the lower hanging fruit, and the 3 at the top are sort of harder transformational things. And so I'll take 3, and Jacob, maybe you can take 3. So we need a little background, which is when it comes to business development for professional services, you have a couple opportunities, right? One is to find new clients, new logos, call them, and the other is to do more work with the folks that you're already serving. And I think we wrote the first book, How Clients Buy, and it asked the question, how do you find new logos? And we wrote that book, and one of our clients, a very senior person, said, we love that book. You asked the wrong question. And we're like, why did we ask the wrong question? And he said, well, because 80% of our new revenues year over year come from existing clients. We're not obsessed with getting new logos. We're obsessed with, he called it landing and expanding inside of a client. So that's interesting. He went on further to say that they had 2 parts of their business, technology and consulting. And he goes, when we force rank our clients by size, call the top section our diamond clients, there's only a 20% overlap between the diamond clients on one side of the business with the other side of the business. So that means we're doing a huge amount of work for AT&T on the technology side of the business, but none on the consulting side. And we're doing a huge amount of work for Verizon on the consulting side, but none on the on the technology side. And he goes, that just feels like an opportunity to share more broadly in what we're doing to the marketplace. So I think Jacob and I sat down and we asked ourselves, Well, let's sort of break that down. Are there subcategories of opportunity? And I'll march through 3 of them. The first, I think, is a simple one, which is more. So we're going to take this intellectual property attorney who's based in Singapore and that is serving a company in Daegu, Korea, a manufacturing company. And it could be that she helped the company file copyrights and patent filings on a new product. And there was a buyer, and the buyer was the head of a division, let's call it the cell phone division. And she did great work. And then that person who's the head of the cell phone division says, hey, we just came out with another new idea for cell phones. Can you help us with that registration as well? So that's just simply more work. It's the same work, intellectual property registration, for the same buyer, the woman that runs the cell phone division. But there are 2 variants on that, and we just sort of need to understand those variants. That's the easiest work to ask for. You know me, you know I do good work, you trust me, we have a good relationship, I've got your back. I think the 2 variants are, hey, I understand that you guys also have a laptop division. I'm wondering if you could introduce me to the person that is in charge of registering patents in the laptop division of your company. So that is, help me proliferate across the company by doing the same thing I've done for you, but working for another division. The challenge there, right, is that while I might be known as a competent intellectual property attorney inside your firm, this new buyer doesn't know who I am, doesn't necessarily trust us, and I'm going to rely on you, my buyer, to introduce me to them. I think the other variant is you work for a law firm that not only does intellectual property, but also does litigation. And so your buyer in the cell phone division of this business in Daegu says, you know what, I've used you for intellectual property protection, but we're being sued by somebody who says we're infringing on our intellectual property. Do you guys do litigation too? And to which the person might say, in the law firm, I do intellectual property, but my partner does litigation. Let me introduce you to them. And there's a case where you need to prove that your firm has got chops in that world, because the client knows you as an intellectual property shop, but they don't necessarily know you as a litigation shop. So those are 2 different variants, and I'll try and put that in a really simple question, really simple language, which is, I'm doing something for you, Kevin. I could do that same thing for somebody else in the company if I could get an introduction, or I could introduce you to one of my partners that does something else that my relationship might find useful. And in that way, land and expand, as our client said. Does that make sense?
Here's what I love about those variations in terms of, I think about this as always from how do people learn the craft. But these are 3 different crafts. So the first craft, which is same buyer, same work, is be attentive, be a listener, take in the work accurately, produce a proposal, and be faithful to your promises. Okay, fine. Expand, which is different work, same buyer. So this is the litigation. It's actually there's a whole technique in there which people can take time to learn, because people do this well or they do it poorly. Be like, forward email to my litigation partner, and they just respond. It's like, what? We've been working together 15 years and you just give me a forward? Like not even a forward with, here's Casey or something? Horrible, right? So there is a technique to be learned.
Yeah, I mean, the technique, right, that we see all the time is, let me set up a call with my partner, Jacob, who's in litigation, and let's talk about it. Or, hey, I'm going to be in town. I'd love to take you to dinner. Jacob is traveling with me. Do you mind if I invite him as well? And then have Jacob ask questions about litigation when we go to dinner. It's a completely different, like you say, technique than just simply saying, Hey, I see you got a new technology coming out. Can I help you with that?
Absolutely. And then we've got yet another technique in extend. Extend, I think I've got you here, Tom, is this is the same work, but now a different buyer. So here's the laptops unit. And there's plenty of room to fumble the ball there as well. But it's a different school, right? Because there's no other partner being introduced. But you might make a presumptuous move. You ring up this laptop head and speak presumptuously about how you're in, I mean, look, just, should I just send you the invoice or what?
So there's
like,
all sorts of things.
Sorry,
Kevin,
your credit. Sorry, go ahead.
It's interesting. No, it's all sorts of things, Kevin. I have to interrupt, but I think we were shocked to find, you would think I do good work for you, Kevin, and I ask you, Kevin, for an introduction to your colleague over in laptops, that you'd be like, sure, it's in the best interest of the company. And I think we were shocked in our interviews to learn how oftentimes you won't do that. I'll ask you for an introduction. You'll say sure, and you flat won't do it. Why is that? Because I don't know, I'm your secret sauce and I make you look good, and maybe you're going to get promoted on this work, and maybe you've got a rivalry with somebody across in laptops. Maybe the company's so darn big that you flat don't know who the head of laptops is. Anyway, there's a lot of downside to recommending people to other people, and there's not a lot of upside in big companies. Anyway, and it takes special efforts to reach out to those people and not be presumptuous, and at the same time not be overly reliant on the client to do all your BD work for you.
I'm seeing Jacob nodding and near laughing. I think there's some you've seen some things.
I couldn't agree more with Tom that it was just mind blowing how frequently, I think Tom and I both have spent our careers in small companies where you're rewarded for taking risk and trying stuff out and being innovative. And I think oftentimes in really big organizations, that's not always the best way to succeed. Sometimes just hitting your marks and doing what's best and sort of what's right in front of you is the way to get promoted. And entrepreneurial folks, it just comes as a surprise to us that that's the way that structure exists.
Do you think it's the case, Jacob, that people maybe miss their self-assessment when they do this too? So like, you'll introduce me to the laptops head because we've got trust and I'm credible, etc. And they're kind of like, oof, that self-assessment's not quite on. I like you. I think you're great. I've enjoyed working with you. It's actually as against your house brand. So we happen to like you, but there's an animus against your company from my company level. I can't be throwing around you. I can't introduce you personally because of the brand you carry or whatever. There's 15 versions of that. But the point being, by all lights, I think an intro to the laptop unit should be fine, but I've missed something critical about what that means at,
I think
in
it's
the shop.
Yes, I think it's totally common. It's a great point you're raising. And I think it's why the most sophisticated expert service firms have really strong and rigorous account planning programs where they kind of know when they have, as Tom would say, Tom used to run a bakery. And so he has this thing called troubled bakeries that he refers to clients who are having a difficult time. And so if you're a good account manager, you sort of know where the sort of troubled bakery relationships are, and you're working to mitigate that risk. Flying in blind and not knowing that exists is incredibly risky, but that self-assessment is important, Kevin.
That is a little tag back to how clients buy, where there's a way to kind of taxonomize that as well and think like, well, maybe you're respected but not trusted, or vice versa, and so forth. There's ways to get that wrong. Okay, so we've hit 3. We've hit more, expand, and extend.
Yep, and I'm happy to hit the other 3. I will tell you, Kevin, when we do this presentation for clients, we draw a line directly through the diamond of opportunity, because I think our belief is if you can get really good at those bottom 3, more, extend, and expand, you will develop business very effectively. The top of the diamond tends to be a little more innovative in nature. And so on the one side, you have reach. So that's different work and different buyer. So this is something that you do internally. In addition to, I think the best example here is probably the legal example. So you do have a litigation service, but you're also trying to sell that to a different buyer. So you're trying to extend both trust and credibility in that space. So that's the reach side. And then there's the evolve side, which is the same buyer, but new work. So this is, hey, we're doing your IP work. What do you think about me taking a look at your graphic design as well? Which obviously is not a service that goes along with one another, but that's what you're trying to do, is you're trying to develop a new service line to sell to your existing buyer. And one of the things that I think we write about that we saw in great detail is this idea of a brand prison, where you're known for doing one thing very well, but no one is ever looking at me to be a graphic designer. And that's actually true, but it might not be the case in some of these organizations. And so you have to work hard to sort of break out of that brand prison, and not get yourself kind of typecast as someone who just does turnarounds or someone who just does XYZ as a service line. And the final one is Innovate, which is brand new work and a different buyer. So you have a little bit of institutional trust and credibility with the person you're currently working with, but you're basically trying to jump to a completely different business unit, perhaps the marketing team in this case, and sell them those graphic design services that I was talking about. And that is also almost as difficult as starting a brand new business. And so I think the counsel we typically give to our clients is, let's crawl before we walk, and let's start with extend, more, and expand.
And so I think Kevin, the substance of account planning, which Jacob mentioned, is looking at a client, and you're saying we need to expand our remit with this client, and brainstorming ideas, and then categorizing them under these 6 different elements. And I think what Jacob said is right, which is we tend to think that the lower hanging fruit are, expand more and extend than the other 3. And so when someone says, I've got an idea, we could offer marketing services to that company. I know somebody that we could hire that could do marketing services. In an account planning process, someone might reasonably go, what we should probably do is just make sure that the woman that runs the cell phone division knows that we've got the capacity to do more intellectual property registration as they continue to develop patents. And maybe our second priority should be to try and get an introduction over to the laptop area, or to introduce the litigation partner to the woman that runs cell phones. Those are probably higher priorities than let's develop a whole new business line, which often is what comes out of a brainstorm around business development. Account planning is really rigor around force ranking where there's opportunity and exactly what that opportunity looks like.
Just one thing on that, Tom. I think that, we have these visions of sales being walking in by yourself with like a big piece of cardboard with some graphs on it and presenting to 8 people behind a gigantic oak desk, and you get a yes or a no right there, right? That's what selling is supposed to be. I love what you're saying about the change in language, Kevin, because that is entirely not what selling is in expert services. And in fact, many expert service firms have between 12 and 16 meetings in their sales cycle, right? And so what we try to do with our clients is to break the account planning process down, not to how are you going to go sell this person something, but how are you going to meet this person and understand their priorities? How are you going to understand their challenges? And can you get a coffee with them? Can you have a quick call with them? Can you send them an article that's uniquely valuable to the problem they're working on today? But breaking it down into individual relationship development steps and not just saying go sell something has been pretty impactful for a lot of our clients.
I'll just jump on that hay wagon a second and share an anecdote from the field where you see, I've seen this mostly with technical services. So we do a lot of work with these folks that are called systems integrators. They'll go and like build the whole data clean or a clean room for a data room or a clean room. It's pretty sophisticated services. But when you work with them and think like, well, what are we going to do in this meeting coming up? We're going to talk to the project planning head and the regional managing director. What are we going to do in that meeting? What are our objectives for that meeting? And when they start with that learning and development process, their objectives are, first of all, there's like 10 of them, and they're sky high. It's like, well, we're going to really wow them, and we're going to get a deep understanding of their next 3 years planning process, and we're going to get buy-in on Delta V technology, and we're going to, get an agreement to send the proposal. And after you work with a crew like that for about 6 months, the objectives end up being something like, we are going to find out who's Keith's boss is.
That's
And
right.
as soon as we find out who Keith's boss is, we leave.
Right.
That's the objective. Who's
That's
Keith's
victory.
boss?
It's so true, Kevin. I was just talking with a client about building a client advisory board, and they said, what if we did it, each of the meetings aligned to our product rollout? And I was like, what if we did it directly related to something that they care about, like their quarterly performance or something like that?
Yes.
What if we just
Yes.
put ourselves in their shoes and we organize around what they care about instead of what we care about? Because if we focus on what they care about, we will find a way to get to what we care about over time.
Very well said. So that bears itself out in the way that we have seen people learn to do business development. This is one of the way we describe these firms, by the way, is like firms in which no one's card has the word sales.
Yep.
You scour the whole org chart, nobody has the word sales on their card. That might sound like a book you guys have heard of before, but that's a definition of an organization where they have to inculcate certain sales practices in the way they set objectives for a meeting or how they go about listening and asking. I sense a dissonance in Evolve, Innovate, and one of the tenets of the prior book, which is credence, credibility, root word credere, right? So a whole premise in expert services, if I'm not right, or if I'm right, is you've earned that expertise. It's born. You took the time to study it. You're deeply practiced in it. And when we're doing these two final stages of the diamond, Evolve, Innovate, you have to leave that behind, don't you? Don't you leave credibility behind in order to have those two conversations?
A little bit, but sometimes, and it depends on the size of the organization, you're borrowing credibility. Because we don't go to market as individual consultants, we go to market as a firm. And so in some cases, those steps on the diamond of opportunity, encourage us to bring in our partners and borrow the credibility that they've amassed over some 25 or 30 years of doing a particular skill. And by the way, it may not be a perfect one-to-one connection on that expertise, but you can get there by sort of borrowing that credibility from your colleagues.
Or hiring. I mean, I think this is the way consulting firms grow, right? Is they'll bring in a lateral hire to start a practice. So I'm doing IP and Jacob's doing litigation, but maybe we hire a partner that's doing sort of new entity organization because we don't have that skill set, but we want to. At least the thesis is we're going to introduce him to our clients with his new capacity. It's harder. It's way harder than just asking for more work from the same buyer doing the same thing. But it's possible, and people do it all the time. It's riskier. You see it fail all the time too. We brought in this person from MBB, and they used to run an education practice there, and we're just going to have them set it up here. And 2 years later, there are no real revenues coming into that practice. So it fails. It's a higher, more risky proposition, but people do it all the time.
We see the geographic version of that a lot in Southeast Asia. So a firm decides there's some business to be done in Thailand, and the way that they go about solidifying that is paying for an expensive human asset in Thailand, who all the locals just basically congratulate, and then they laughingly watch, and wait for the resignation party, which is going to come about 11 and a half months later.
It's so true. I mean, we also see clients who invest in an expensive human asset and also an expensive office asset at times too, where they say we are making a mark in this particular geo. And we encourage our clients to do something slightly different, which is invest in relationship development before you think about putting a person there or before you think about spending the money on an office or a commitment to a lease. Understand who you want to serve, what's the market you think you have a right to work in, and just start developing relationships, not to sell to those people, but to understand the market, understand the landscape, and see where you might fit in to create value for those people.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the hack there, if you will, is incrementally entering the market. So is there work we could do in the UK from the United States that would allow us to sort of then justify having a more full-time presence? Or I noticed that some of our clients have a need for new entity organizational legal work. We don't offer that, but we have a preferred provider that we go to market with. And maybe that's prelude over the course of 5 years before we ask that provider to join our firm full-time as a partner to sort of to build the practice, having built 2 or 3 case studies where we worked well together before. And so it's not truly now new work, but existing work that we're extending to our current clients.
One of the things that came up in discussion at the Sage team around Innovate was because we were wrestling with this idea, like, don't you have to leave the safe quarters of your credibility? And I'd like to put it to you guys as a question is, do you have a way of delineating what the credibility is? So it could be that Pi is looking at a Japan office, right? We'll take that example, Tom, because we were kicking it around a little bit, just parlor room chat. But on the day that a client takes that proposition seriously and is quite interested, it's not that they're saying, "Oh, I give up on wrestling you on your credibility as a Japanese marketplace participant," because the credentials aren't there as a Japanese marketplace participant. But instead, they're going, "We know you tend to be promise keepers and hardworking and good listeners." So there's these more abstract things. They're not. What is that, guys? Is that credibility? Is that respect? Is it some other thing? Because I think sometimes that actually is what wins the day on the innovation side.
Yeah, so I think
trust more. Go ahead, Jacob.
I was going to say the same thing, Tom. I think it's trust with those individuals. So I think we think of trust as doing the right thing when your back is turned. So like, this isn't really true, but Tom would trust me to look after his kids. That's trust. And it's not something I need to have any unique skill set to do. On the flip side, credibility is this belief that I can do what I say I'm going to do. I can go into Adobe Photoshop and do a brilliant graphic design. That's credibility to me. And so I think that the attributes you're talking about relate more to trust, and extending that trust from a domestic office to an office in Japan is something that's doable, but as you point out, it takes a lot of hard work.
You say I would trust my kids with you?
I was joking. I know you never would.
Yeah, never after 5 and never on a Saturday. Yeah.
A couple more things I'd like to touch on, guys. If I can just circle back to what you call the Hippocratic Oath of expert services, which is maybe put it in your terms, because I'm concerned I may get it wrong. I believe it's, always help first. Is that approximately right? What's the terminology?
I think that's right.
Yeah.
Do no harm.
Isn't that, I just wonder, isn't that a little bit Pollyanna-ish? And it doesn't seem to be, when you encounter sort of a killer level partner at McKinsey or Latham Watkins, you're like, the best fee earner. You aren't thinking like, oh, they're just running around like Helpful Harry, right? It's just in any way that they can pitch in, they're doing so. That seems a little too silver lined a story.
So I don't think that's true. I think what the thing that makes expert services so unique is the number of human beings that an expert serves is quite small. It's why narrow casting your voice and your offering is more effective than broadcasting. Very big, powerful, McKinsey partners might count 4 key client relationships as their entire practice, or less, 3, 2. And you can be sure that they are being helpful to those people at every turn, in every way. They've done a mind well. So if I'm at, Wilson Sonsini and Microsoft is my client, I'm looking at the world through Microsoft's eyes. And when I talk to the general counsel, I'm bringing value to her, and I'm saying, hey, here's what I saw out in the marketplace. You might not have heard this about Google, but I want to report this into you. She's being helpful. She's leading with service before she's making any kind of asks. In fact, it's quite white shoe. It's like, I'm going to add value to the point where we're all just going to feel embarrassed because you're not paying me, and we've got to figure out some commercial relationship. And we'll wrap a high margin commercial relationship around what we do, even if we just call you a senior advisor to the company. But leading, as Jacob said before, the key insight here is what's good for the client, not what's good for me. What good for the client precedes what's good for me. What's good for me flows out of what's good for the client. The problem with all sales books is they're self-referential. What can I do in order to cause someone else to do something that will help me? And you can smell that, like you can smell fear on a cornered fox in the yard. You've got to back off of that. You have to lean into being of service, being curious, asking, customizing, connecting. Those are the verbs that add value to potential clients. And in the end, they're the ones that create the relationships that have a commercial element to them.
And I think that ability to engage and add value over time is uniquely difficult right now. There's been just so many webinars, so many pieces of thought leadership, because it's been the kind of go-to move in marketing because of the COVID pandemic. And I think historically, 25 years ago, partners came in on Monday morning and sent out clippings, letters, things like that to clients and potential clients. And I think that there is risk in trying to automate some of that stuff. That the authenticity of sending 1 or 2 pieces is more impactful, perhaps, than automatically sending 15 or 20.
Let's be controversial. I think we don't believe in demand gen. So there are entire companies that are built on the proposition that if you send out a little an offer to download a white paper, that you can harvest leads that you can then follow up, and they've sort of pre-qualified themselves, and you'll find good business in those methods. And the truth is that half the people that download your white paper are graduate students or work for companies that are too small or in a geography too far away. And it's not a particularly good prospect group. It's a lot easier just to sit down with a practice lead and say, hey, who are the manufacturing companies you want to work with in Southeast Asia around intellectual property? And they'll just name them for you. You don't need to play this game of baiting people with a white paper to somehow discover the 15 companies that make all the difference. Just ask the practice lead and they'll tell you. And then the game becomes, how do you meet them? Anyway, I don't think we're big fans of this sort of this sort of holy grail that we can automate things with computers and we'll never actually have to talk to anybody. Demand will be just generated and it'll come our direction. That might be true for, I don't know, website development, but it's not true for, multi-million-dollar expert service engagement.
there's been a theme recently on a topic that gets touched on very briefly. You'd almost blink and miss it in the book, but you guys make a comment about this kind of material not being taught in universities, and that it may belong there. That is being echoed across a lot of very interesting disciplines, such as the mature established tenets of networking properly. In my world, the mature established tenets about how you teach and learn in an office context, in a workplace. In your world, how you evolve a relationship, commercial relationship, properly. Why? There are business schools, right? Within the last 80 years, the concept of a business school, as opposed to just, a liberal arts education, has evolved. But why have certain topics which seem to be absolutely at the tip of the spear for how a professional operates and succeeds, have they not been included in the core curriculum?
I want this one, Tom. I think one, university curriculum is built on sort of a rigorous view of the material. And so from that perspective, I give a little bit of credit, because it just takes time for that stuff to become prevalent. But the other thing is that when you put a sales class on the calendar for a bunch of people who are expecting to be sitting behind the oak desk that I mentioned earlier, they don't want to take a sales class. Nobody actually signs up for it. Tom and I have thrown around the idea that there should be a class in every law school in the country that's called How to Make Partner. Because the way you make partners with relationship development and business development, not from being the very best intellectual property attorney in the world, but it's from knowing people. And so I think it's something that I have tried to make happen at the university in my hometown. And I've sort of worked on this as a thesis, because I think it should be taught. And just as a random additional comment, I think MBAs are traditionally still very structured around the manufacturing business. The concepts taught in an MBA are often around manufacturing. And while that's very useful to know, it's not the place that the lion's share of those graduates end up working.
So you do some adjunct professor work at Jake Jebb's B School, yes?
I have, yes. I'm not doing that right now. Yep.
Okay, and that's here in beautiful Bozeman, I believe. That right? That's a part of Montana
right.
State.
It is. Mm-hmm.
What do you teach when you're there? Do you sneakily slip in some of this high quality information under the guise of another title, like marketing or something? What do you teach when you're there?
The class I've taught is business writing, and one of the great joys of life is being non-tenure track, which means you don't really care and you can fail students and teach whatever you want, which is what I did. And so a lot of the teaching I did had a lot of these elements about relationship development, the way an email should look. Like I did an assignment in my class, for example, that was shortest email wins, that has all of the information in the email, because that's what we all want to read. And so I did include some of this stuff in there, but not quite as much, because it's sort of a sophomore junior level course, and they're not quite ready for the sophistication of these relationship development techniques. But you can imagine it's a theme throughout when I'm teaching.
I think it's just like, it goes to what you want to be when you grow up. I want to be an astronaut. There are people that grow up and they want to be a finance person. So they get a CPA and they're like, I'm going to be really smart at that. Or other people that want to be a lawyer because they saw something on TV and they're like, I want to do that. These people don't wake up and say, I want to be a salesperson. I want to do business development. But I think Jacob captured it perfectly, which is to be the smartest intellectual property attorney is to be called of counsel. To be the smartest intellectual property attorney at a firm that increases the size of the pie for all partners is to be made partner at 36. I just think the world needs to catch up to the fact that making new friends and deepening relationships with people that you currently serve is the essence of commerce. We're doing ourselves a disservice if we don't talk about the essence of commerce in these various commercial professions.
I love the way that Dan Pink writes about it. I think we quote this in the book, but Dan Pink writes in his book basically that some 40% of our time is spent in non-sales selling. Persuading Tom where to go to lunch, persuading my students to write shorter, all the kinds of things that you're trying to persuade people. Like, it's a useful skill for life, even outside of your career. Like, just persuasion is really important. And I think that's another helpful lens to use in an academic context. Is this is persuasion. This is not, a used car. Everyone has a picture of a guy with a short sleeve plaid shirt, tie on, overweight, selling cars, and nobody wants to be that person. And so persuasion just sounds more sophisticated.
I will tell you that I think that the way in which our work is becoming more digital, more computer focused, and we're working from home remotely, is actually driving us in the wrong direction. People are losing the skills of walking the hallways to meet new people and drum up new business, making friends with young people that grow up to become CFO of something one day. We're losing that ability to use our social nature as human beings to make new friends and to try and understand challenges we didn't realize an organization had that we might be able to help with. It worries me.
It worries me too. It worries me from the perspective of teaching and learning in the workplace, because while it may be easy for the 50-year-old partner to say, I could probably handle this from my cabin in the Rockies, so we'll take a week out. Actually, the person who loses out most is the young associate who doesn't hear any cooler chat. They don't get picked off at the last minute to join the client review meeting. They don't get asked to take, come to the court session and take those notes, and so forth, and pick up the scuttlebutt from the taxi on the way and so forth. So we wrote a somewhat prickly internal memo to some of our law clients advocating that when you decide to work from home, someone gets hurt, and it's actually the folks who are hoping to show up and learn the way you happened to in the 80s, just by osmosis. So
the chairman of our board is an old McKinsey Accenture hand, and he calls it curbside training. He goes, you barrel in there, you have a conversation with the CFO, you talk about their kids, you talk about what the business is doing, you talk about what competitors are doing, you talk about their biggest challenges. And, you walk out going, hey, would it be helpful if we pulled together a proposal around taking at least this one burden off your shoulders? And the junior person sits there and takes notes, but out at the curbside, you turn around as a partner and you go, what did you hear? What happened in there? What did you notice was going on? How did we get to the point where we were pitching? Was it really crude and we had a big PowerPoint and we were walking through it and said, therefore you need to buy, will you? No, we didn't do that. So let's talk about it. That's all lost when we're back to back on Teams calls.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. One of the things that I noticed, I'll make this the last question, gents, because I've used enough of your time already, but this book, and it was in the prior volume as well, is chock full of detailing out problems. So unlike many a nonfiction business book, which has a quick en passant on the problem, like, oh, by the way, there's a reason to care about all the stuff I write in the next 7 chapters, could be tricky. The term thorny problem I picked up from the last book and have used ever since then. You guys go into problems and then problems upon problems and ways in which the things we've just taught you probably won't work out if you don't, just kind of use propriety and pick the timing and the situation right. I think there's a real culture in the writing team of just a respect for how tricky some of this craft can be. So for those who intend to pick it up, it's not a volume of nice, tidy answers. It's a double volume of a bunch of ways in which things can explode, go wrong, stops, reversals, and some lessons for success. Do you think that's a fair reading?
I do. I mean, I think you said it before. There's a sort of poverty of literature around business development in professional services, the fastest growing sector of the economy worldwide. And so it's hubris to think that we have all the answers. I think we're really interested in the subject, and we know there's a community of people out there that are really interested in the subject. And so this is meant to be sort of a start of a conversation. And you know, our hope is that it becomes university fodder and that people do rigorous studies. We hope that other books are written, and that we can develop this piece of our kind of common knowledge that needs developing. You know, I always say, if you're an expert, you're in the business of helping people solve problems. That's a good thing in the world. There are a lot of problems in the world, and there's an inefficiency in the marketplace between problems and experts that can solve them. And if we can be in some small way part of building a bridge from the people that are smart to the people that have challenges, well, I think maybe the world is just a little bit better for it. But it's a start, not a finish.
I agree with everything you said, Tom. I would just call out one other thing, which is that I think that we find in this world of ours of professional services business development that the capability to tell stories cannot be overestimated. It's the most important skill to have, and I think that comes through in our writing. The stories that we tell inform the way we see the world. And I think it's something we work constantly with our team on, is how do we make the stories that Tom and I have amassed over the last 20 years into the stories of the firm. Because you don't win a lot of work saying, hey, your IRR should be 17%. No, you win a lot of work going, let me tell you about how I worked on getting IRR up in this other company. They were facing something similar to you. That works. And so I think that we tell stories to illustrate the way we see the world.
It's an inductive view of things. Right? At the end of the day, I don't want to be in the business of a priori making up stuff that I think is a crystalline palace of logic.
Yes.
We want to be grounded in the reality of people that have to, you know, sit in the middle seat and fly over to a new geography and sit down with somebody in the, you know, after navigating a taxi in the rain and having a conversation about their business and how they can help.
Well, I'll share something really quite delightful that came out of some readings at the end of last year. Hannah Arendt is just one of the great powerhouse philosophers who doesn't get enough time to shine. And she distinguished that in the history of critical thought, we had the Greeks and the Romans, and the foundation of their philosophy began with wonder. So the start point was, what the heck is that? And how do you guys think that this? And here's a weird thing. That was the start point. And when we got to Descartes, that switched. The foundation stone became doubt. And that was great in that it gave us, you know, ways to build way better bridges and get to, like, you know, advanced machine learning models and things. Like doubt as your cornerstone is effective in one way. But I think when I read this and I speak to you guys, you're the inheritors of the Greek and the Roman model, which is like, hey, check it out. It looks like when lawyers go talk to people, sometimes it like blows up in their face and sometimes it goes just unbelievably well. I wonder what the difference is, you know, click in. Hey, sometimes when it blows up in their face, it actually goes well later. Oh, I wonder why that. So I detect this theme of kind of not childlike, but still wide-eyed wonder in like the Platonic and Aristotelian sense. What's going on? I just wonder about that. And then obviously the capability to dig in and do some, you know, analytical work on it. But it isn't my job when we have these conversations to cheerlead the author, cheerlead the book and so forth. But there I am. Wonderful book, a great contribution, something truly new. So tell me, Jets, where should people best go? Because you've got bios and a lot of detail and some interesting little like extra nuggets on the website, including like self-assessment tools and so forth. So people could head there. They can find you on LinkedIn. They can just buy the books off Amazon. What is your natural preference for where people go?
For me, I like people just emailing me, tmcmakin, that's my last name, @profitableideas.com. I don't know.
Great.
I'm pretty good at answering email. We
Good.
don't live in, the thing is, the number of people that are interested in this are not, they don't number in the millions and millions, you know? We're a special class of folks, and we deserve to talk with each other.
John Grisham, I am not. I would agree, Tom. jmparks @profitableideas is my email. I agree. Or LinkedIn. I think we have stuff going on LinkedIn all the time, interesting interviews and different things. And of course, we'll share this on LinkedIn as well, but email is always a good place to start.
Okay, super.
Kevin,
Thank you
thanks for
both.
this. We appreciate it.
Yes, Kevin.
Yeah.
Enjoyed it.